Tonight, the 2020 election now being fought in the courts as President Trump makes bold claims of mail-in fraud and stolen votes. Meanwhile,
so that's why today I've named the COVID-19 Transition Advisory Board.
Joe Biden moves forward, putting together a plan to combat the pandemic as the infection rate accelerates across the country.
It's not going to help us this winter, but it could be a real game changer.
And stocks surge on the promising results of a coronavirus vaccine and an election that ushered in an era of divided government. Plus, the role of Christians and the proper way to respond in these divided times. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. The leader at the top post at the Pentagon out of a job tonight. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup. Well, a surprise move today from President Trump when he fired Defense Secretary Mark Esper. The president made the announcement on Twitter this afternoon. And during his time at the Pentagon, Esper occasionally made statements clashing with the commander-in-chief. Senior Washington correspondent Tara Mergener is here now with more. Tara?
John, well, some insiders have speculated that President Trump would eventually take action on Esper. The big surprise is the timing, given it's just a week after Election Day and the nation faces a transition of government. Among the disagreements between the two, the withdrawal of U.S. forces from key bases abroad and using active duty troops to calm violent protests here at home. Esper was Army Secretary when the president picked him last year to replace acting Secretary Patrick Shanahan. The biggest clash with the president came during this summer's unrest, which led to a debate over the proper role of the military in addressing potential violence. Esper's opposition to using active duty troops to restore calm, including in Washington, D.C., led to wide speculation that he was prepared to quit if the issue resurfaced. He also differed with President Trump over controversial Confederate issues in the military. While the president called displays of the Confederate flag a matter of free speech, Esper disagreed and also supported renaming 10 military bases named after Confederate generals. The president has named Christopher Miller, the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, as acting defense secretary. Now, there is some concern the move could unsettle U.S. allies and partners. Conventional wisdom is that stability at the Pentagon and the military be maintained during a possible transition to a new administration. John.
All right, CBN's Tara Mergener. Thank you, Tara. Well, Joe Biden is not waiting for vote certification or Inauguration Day to get to work. Today, he tackled his first order of business. CBN White House correspondent Ben Kennedy joins us now with more on that. Ben, coronavirus was a top-tier talking point all throughout the campaign, and it's still a priority now as Biden prepares to lead the nation.
Yeah, John, you're right. Biden's focus is now on the pandemic. In fact, today he created a coronavirus working group. Leading that advisory council is former Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy, former Food and Drug Administration Commissioner David Kessler, and Dr. Marcella Nunez-Smith of Yale. Now, Biden's plan includes doubling the number of COVID testing sites and boosting tracing. It calls on governors to mandate masks and for the task force to look at racial disparities.
The challenge before us right now is still immense and growing. And although we are not in office yet, I'm just laying out what we expect to do and hope can be done, some of it between now and the time we are sworn in.
Now, President Trump has not conceded the race. In fact, his campaign released a statement in part saying this election is far from over as they continue to mount a legal battle. John?
The election drama continues. Thanks, Ben. Well, a potential Biden administration could have enormous implications on America's foreign policy trajectory over the next 4 years. Here to assess some of the major issues abroad is CBN senior international correspondent George Thomas. George, Iran is at the top of the list. How are Iranians reacting to a potential Biden administration, and how differently will he handle the mullahs in Tehran than President Trump?
Yeah, well, the Associated Press took their cameras to the streets of Tehran over the weekend to ask people what they thought about it. Initially, obviously, any any comments that would be affirming to the president, to the current president of the United States, would get you in trouble. Clearly, there is a segment of the Iranian population that feels that Trump was bad for Iran, bad for the Middle East because of the economic sanctions. But folks that I have spoken to, Iranian experts, those who watch the country inside and outside, overwhelmingly say that Trump was very good for Iran, that the maximum pressure over the last 4 years, even though has been crippling for their economy and for the basic life in Iran, they believed that it would bring the eventual downfall of the mullahs in Tehran. Biden potentially comes into the White House with a diametrically opposite point of view. He was, along with the former President Obama, the architect of this controversial Iranian nuclear deal, which the president pulled the United States out of 4 years ago. Biden says that if he is elected, this is during the campaign, he would rejoin that agreement and bring along the international coalition. So you'll definitely see a diametrically opposite approach as it deals with Iran.
George, zooming out a little to the wider Middle East, it's undergoing dramatic reshaping with several Arab countries making peace with Israel.
That's right.
Does that shift come to an end with a President Biden?
We're not quite sure. You know, today in the UAE, the first Israeli flight leaving Tel Aviv landed in the UAE, bringing with it Israeli citizens for the very first time, something that has not happened for decades in this part of the region. Clearly, as you mentioned, Israel has been making these deals with various Arab countries. Biden has supported the Trump administration's outreach in terms of bringing these various countries together. I think the reality is that for the last 4 years, the Middle East has been changing, and the Sunni countries have appreciated that the Trump administration has been trying to isolate and put all this pressure on Iran, which is a Shia country. Now, with Biden potentially, getting back on the Iranian nuclear deal and maybe siding with Iran or trying to get Iran to the negotiating table, could change the dynamics, absolutely. But clearly, the United States, potentially under a Biden administration, will have to contend with Saudi Arabia and Israel, two countries that are vehemently opposed to the mullahs in Tehran.
George, in the few seconds we have left, how will the Biden administration or a potential Biden administration handle the crisis on the Korean Peninsula with North Korea?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, diametrically opposite. For the last 4 years, President Trump and Kim Jong-un have exchanged love letters. As you know, the two leaders have met, which have been absolutely unorthodox and unprecedented. Well, from exchanging love letters in the Trump administration, the Biden administration, potential Biden administration, has called Kim Jong-un, that you see there on the screen, a thug. And Biden has said he will not meet with the Kim Jong-un and will take more of a internationalist point of view and approach when dealing with these crises. The bottom line here is that the president's America First policy on the international stage will be completely replaced by an internationalist approach by a potential Biden administration in the next 4 years.
All right, George, CBN international correspondent. Thanks so much, George Thomas.
You're welcome, buddy.
Well, Republican attorneys general are raising a red flag this afternoon, hoping to get the attention of the Supreme Court to weigh in on the election decision in Pennsylvania. CBN's Eric Phillips joins us now with more on that. Eric, they're saying the Keystone State's highest court overstepped its bounds?
Well, that's right. The attorney generals from Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Missouri are laying out why the U.S. Supreme Court should weigh in this situation. They say the Pennsylvania Supreme Court overstepped its bounds and really sidestepped the law when it extended the deadline and really when mail-in ballots should be received or even postmarked by Pennsylvania. And they claim in doing so, Pennsylvania's election was opened up to all sorts of possible tampering where these mail-in ballots were concerned. The filings by the Republican Attorneys General Association support other similar lawsuits that have been filed by the Trump camp, where Pennsylvania is concerned specifically. But in addition to that, we're learning that there may be an organized warfare plan on the ground in other places like Arizona and Georgia, where recounts will likely get underway. Now, there are reportedly efforts to get more GOP staffers on the ground in those areas so they can have more eyes watching. Also, reports from the Trump camp that evidence of voter fraud has been found, including obituaries of those who allegedly voted in last week's election. We're keeping an eye out to see how all of that plays out. We're told many in Republican leadership have concerns that all of these efforts will really not be that effective and that they have communicated those concerns to President Trump. Still, these efforts will continue to move forward at the commander-in-chief's behest. John, Jenna.
All right. CBN's Eric Phillips. Thanks so much, Eric. New hope in the fight against the coronavirus and just how close drug companies are to creating a vaccine. Next on Faith Nation.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep as the world watches from the outside.
It's a big diplomatic tug of war here in the Middle East.
Go inside the story with Jerusalem Dateline.
Israeli archaeologists are talking about a discovery that could change the thinking about the Temple Mount.
Join CBN Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell and get the biblical perspective on the events shaping the world.
What starts in Israel then ends up going to other places.
Watch Jerusalem Dateline Friday night at 9:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
Welcome back. The Supreme Court will hear its third major legal challenge to the Affordable Care Act Tuesday. More than 20 million Americans depend on the ACA, also known as Obamacare, for health coverage. Challengers say it should be struck down because the individual mandate is no longer required. Justices will decide whether that makes the entire law unconstitutional and if it should be repealed. The Supreme Court first upheld the law in 2012 and then again in 2015. A final ruling is expected next June. Well, stock markets skyrocketed Monday after drug maker Pfizer said its COVID vaccine was 90% effective at preventing the virus. Markets already were sharply higher as media outlets called Biden the winner of the presidential race. Dow futures spiked 4% higher, while the S&P 500 jumped up 3%. The economy has continued to recover from earlier shutdowns despite rising infections and death rates from the pandemic. Well, Pfizer's findings still need to be verified by other health officials, but the company says the early data from the trials shows its COVID-19 vaccine is more effective than the flu vaccine. CBN medical reporter Lori Johnson joins us now with more details. Lori, how close is Pfizer to getting this vaccine approved, and what does that news mean to the average American?
Well, Pfizer still has to clear some hurdles, John. This new data shows in phase 3 trials consisting of 40,000 volunteers that the vaccine is 90% effective in preventing people from being infected with the COVID-19 virus. Earlier, the FDA said they'd settle for anything better than 50%, so this is a lot better than 50% efficacy. The annual flu shot is usually around 60% effective. This Pfizer data was verified by an unbiased, independent board, a committee of experts such as scientists and doctors. The next steps involve further peer reviews, and the most critical one is FDA emergency use authorization. Once that EUA is granted, then people can start getting their shots. Pfizer says they could apply to the FDA for that emergency use authorization later this month, John.
So, Lori, if it does get the authorization, how long before people can actually start getting their shots?
Well, it could be within weeks of the EUA being granted, so maybe before the end of this year. Pfizer reportedly will have about 20 million doses by then, and that's really not that much, John, when you consider the American population is about 350 million, so 20 million, 350 million. The first people who will receive the vaccine are the frontline healthcare workers, then other people at high risk, like people who live in nursing homes. The Pfizer vaccine consists of 2 shots, one and then a booster a month later. We don't know yet how long the vaccine protects a person, how many months or years a person is immune.
So a lot more to find out. Well, what about some of the other vaccines beside the Pfizer vaccine? Could they also be getting approval?
Absolutely. There are 3 other vaccines in their final trials, and these other vaccines that are in their final trials are in the United States. It looks like the Moderna vaccine is very close to finishing, and it looks very promising. The Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine are actually very similar. They both use the same technology for development, so it's very likely there will be more than one vaccine approved. The 2 other vaccines are made by Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca. John.
Lori, this, of course, is great news. You know, you've been covering this crisis for us. Does this give us hope, even as we see the number of cases rising, even as we're hearing more about a potential spike?
Well, that's a great point that you brought up, because we need to not get too excited too soon, because this vaccine is not going to be available to the general public till January, February, March, and we have to get through the holidays first. So think about it. We've got Thanksgiving 2.5 weeks, and then, of course, Christmas and New Year's. We've got families who are going to be getting together. They're probably not going to be social distancing unless people have huge houses. Wearing a mask might be very problematic. When you think about people eating Thanksgiving dinner and eating all these other things, and, you know, people inside for long periods of time, this could be very problematic throughout the holidays. So we really need to keep our guard up for the next few months. And don't forget, it's also cold and flu season.
That is right. A lot to consider, and as you just said, we need to remain vigilant.
Absolutely.
CBN medical reporter Lori Johnson, thank you for always keeping us informed. Well, praying for our leaders. Up next, we'll hear from Russell Moore on how Christians should respond to the election results.
On October 1st, 1961, history was made when a tiny station began transmitting the first signals of the Christian Broadcasting Network.
CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network.
And now, a new era has begun with the all-new CBN News Channel.
Just moments ago, the Iron Dome intercepted an incoming rocket right on the Gaza border.
Administering in this area, spiritual warfare is definitely involved.
A 24/7 news network, bringing you the news you want from a source you can trust.
In Kenya, 40% of the medical services are actually provided by these Christian hospitals.
Let's talk about the economy.
Believers here are joining together to win people to Jesus Christ.
All your favorite shows now in one place. Go to cbnnewschannel.com to find out how to get the CBN News Channel on your TV all day, every day. CBN News. Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life, life to the fullest. Life in your family, life in your finances, life in your body, mind, and spirit, life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
I am Region's first ROTC graduate student.
Welcome back. Well, where does a post-Trump White House leave evangelicals who've been among his most loyal supporters? According to the Bible, it still means praying for our leaders. In a piece written over the weekend called Christians, Let's Pray for President-elect Joe Biden, Southern Baptist leader Russell Moore reminded believers of the biblical mandate to pray for all leaders to have wisdom and discernment. And joining us now is Dr. Russell Moore, president of the Southern Baptist Convention's Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. Dr. Moore, thanks for being with us this afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
Dr. Moore, you say no matter how you voted, now is the time to pray for our newly elected leaders in Washington. Can you explain why that's so important?
Well, the Bible commands all Christians to pray for those who are in authority, kings and all those who are in authority. Scripture says in Romans 13, 1 Timothy 2, and 1 Peter as well. And so that means that we have a responsibility to not only to pray for those who are elected or in office at every level, but maybe even most specifically for Christians to pray for elected officials maybe they didn't vote for. And so it's sort of a spiritual discipline to show us that prayers are not about what we approve of politically. They're about wisdom and discernment for those who are in authority. So 4 years ago, Christians who were dismayed by President Trump should have been praying very diligently for him to have wisdom and discernment to succeed in every good thing. And now those Christians should be doing the same thing for President-elect Biden, for Senate Majority Leader McConnell, and for their local officials. I mean, we face some really, really difficult times ahead where everyone is going to have immense wisdom to navigate it.
Dr. Moore, along those lines, how do you counsel Christians who struggle with that, especially when President Trump is vowing to fight the election results? Is it premature to view the race as decisive if it's still being litigated in the courts?
Well, there's, of course, a mechanism for anyone to challenge any election. And so if there are ways to demonstrate that the election result is not what it seems to be, then that would be litigated in court. But I think most people expect that when all the dust is settled, we will have the scenario we pretty much see in front of us right now.
Dr. Moore, you hinted at this earlier. I've heard some who oppose Trump say he's not their president. The same thing's true for those who did not support President Obama. You provided a biblical framework to pray for our leaders regardless of who they are. Is this an opportunity for Christians to demonstrate what being Christ-like looks like in these divided times?
I think it is. I mean, we live in what, if you think of the old George Jones, Tammy Wynette song, a two-story house, a two-story nation, at least two, with people telling very different stories about what the country is or what the country ought to be. This is our opportunity to say our honoring and praying for our elected officials does not mean that we do not dissent. Does not mean that we don't affirm people with whom we disagree when they do something right, or to challenge people with whom we disagree with whom we agree when they do something wrong. And so what we ought to all hope is that everyone in leadership succeeds at every good thing and not just fails at every bad thing, but learns from that failure and moves towards something good. And I think we ought to be praying for that.
Dr. Moore, real quickly here, what do you see as the role of believers today in helping to heal the divisions, whether along racial, economic, or political lines?
Well, I think the primary thing is to be the church and to have our primary identity as the body of Christ, and then to live that out in terms of loving God and loving neighbor. That's not something that is going to be done in a week's time or 2 months' time. We have to commit our entire next 40 years to that.
All right, Dr. Russell Moore with the Ethics and Liberty, with the Ethics and Liberty Commission. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Moore.
Thanks for having me.
When the Bidens move back to Washington, they will restart a nearly 120-year White House tradition. We explain when Faith Nation returns.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
I'm Ephraim Graham, and this is Studio 5. Cruise with me as I discover the good things happening in the world of music, sports, television, and movies.
The fact that Ryan Coogler was going to be directing the film, I knew that something special was going to happen.
We'll chat with artists at the forefront of entertainment and explore the connection between popular culture and faith.
I asked my pastor, I said, well, does that mean I'm supposed to be a preacher? He says, well, no, you already have a pulpit.
Watch Studio 5 Wednesday night at 9:30.
Remember for a moment what it was like to be a child. You believed every story you were told. You saw a world full of endless possibilities. What stories will the world's orphaned and at-risk children believe? We believe the Bible tells the only story truly worth believing. We believe that every child should have the opportunity to dream, the chance to take challenges and turn them into possibilities, the chance to stand on the promises of God, to recognize their place in the greatest story ever told. They have their whole lives ahead of them. Theirs is a world of endless possibilities. They are looking for a story to believe. We will tell them that story. Will you join us?
I am Regent's first ROTC graduate student.
And finally tonight, it's been said if you want a friend in Washington, buy a dog. Well, Joe Biden enters the White House in January. He will be bringing 2 four-legged friends with him, German Shepherds Champ and Major. While Champ is a political veteran coming to the Bidens as a puppy in 2008, Major joined the family 2 years ago, adopted from a Delaware Humane Society, and he will be the first shelter dog to make the White House a home. President Trump was the first president to not have any pets in more than 120 years. Well, that is going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation. Thank you so much for joining us, and hope to see you back here tomorrow.